just I don't know, maybe just a thin amount left to go. And Amy Habel was supposed to be our host today, but most of you know that she's has a substitute, awesome substitute, Jenny Beal. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Bill. Hi, everyone.
Welcome, everybody. So this week we're looking at 371 to 380, and it's really, really good stuff. I mean, once your mind is in Atmananda mode, you start to see things better. At least that's my experience, and I'm sure it's many of yours. And Jenny, of course, as always, she's the leading edge of making sure we get it right and correctly understood and inserted into our vernacular so that we don't screw it up like most of the world screws it up. Thank you, Jenny, for being a substitute today. Tell us what you think about the first one, 371. Is there a subject-object relationship in any time?
Yes, and of course, the idea of subject-object relationship is it's really a conceptualization of mind. So what he says is the I principle is the only one thing whose existence is never questioned. This is never an object of the senses or the mind. And regarding the I principle at the time of experience, no subject-object relationship exists. And so in those two paragraphs, what he's referring to is consciousness without objects, where when we go into pure consciousness, then it's very clear no subject-object relationship exists, there's no objects. Now, the next two paragraphs, he's referring to consciousness in the presence of object, the presence of perceptions. So that's sahaja samadhi, or the natural state. And he's saying that the objects of perception have no real separate existence. He says the apparent object gets transformed into the I principle or knowledge and stands as one with it, beyond all subject-object relationship. Sound, form, etc., are never perceived as such, but knowledge. And it's really saying that the whole idea of sound and form and all the other characteristics of objects are just conceptualizations of the mind. They're just fabrications. They're not reality.
Well, what do you think is the reason, the best reason to know this?
I think it's important to know this because it's very, very common to confuse mind with consciousness. And as far as mind is concerned, there is duality. Mind can only work in duality. So we have the witness, and we have what is witnessed, and that's a conceptualization of mind. So it's important to know that there's something beyond mind. So in that very first paragraph, the I principle is never an object of the senses or the mind. It can't be seen. What we essentially are cannot be seen. It cannot be perceived by the mind as an object, because
Right.
It's not an object.
Right.
Because all objects are inventions, essentially, of mind.
And yet they're seen, once understanding is established, they're seen as one with everything. There's not a separate.
Yes. Well, once understanding is established, then we still see things in the same way. We still have the same mental models which condition our perceptions, but we know their reality. We know their reality is pure consciousness, or the ultimate reality.
Right. And that's why on that last paragraph, he said that the activity of the jnanan is also the same. So it has it sees everything from that pure I principle.
Yeah. Yes.
And jnanan is just one with understanding, one who is awake, or
it's one on the path to understanding. Might have some level of understanding, might have complete understanding. It's someone who is following that particular path of knowledge.
All right.
Right.
Okay.
Is there somebody's mic open?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thanks for that. I didn't catch it. So it says in that last sentence, it means that sound, form, etc., are never perceived as such, but all of them merge in knowledge. So everything is seen as one thing, as you saw.
Yes, it doesn't mean that that we don't still see objects as tables and chairs and so on, because that's our natural mental model, which the mind superimposes onto seeing. So that's still there, but ultimately we know that that's not the reality. We know that all we're seeing is ourself. Everything, there's nothing that's outside of myself. Everything is myself.
Yeah. Okay. And Rick put something in here I thought was really good. Like Jenny stated, this is really an important pointer to grok and understand. It's impossible to establish a relationship with what you are. Once clearly understood, it helps to dismantle many false and erroneous assumptions. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that, Rick. Once understanding becomes more established, everything is really seen for what it is, the I principle, yet the mountains will remain mountains, etc. And then Kendall said, Jenny, would you say the understanding comes from both a phenomenal sense and consciousness, since we tend to relate to understanding coming from a mental and feeling sense also?
Well, really what happens is that, first of all, there's a question or a dilemma, and that's in the mental sphere. Or it can also be in the field of feeling as well. And then there's a dropping back into pure consciousness. Sometimes it can be so, well, it's timeless, so sometimes it's not really noticed, but there is that dropping back into pure consciousness, and it's there that understanding arises. And then once that understanding has arisen, then because of the context of the original question or dilemma, then that understanding will get expressed in mental form. So the understanding itself is not in any thought form, not in words, but even not in pictures, and not in mathematics or anything. It's just an understanding that's a condition of pure consciousness, and but it gets expressed typically in words. Sometimes understanding might not get expressed, but if it comes originally from a question or some kind of dilemma, then usually it will get re-expressed.
Okay. 372, what is the relative importance of our activities?
Yeah, so he says we have three different kinds of activities: perceiving, thinking, and knowing. The former two being false and the last alone real. And when he uses the word false, what he means here is has no real existence or no independent reality. And he's using knowing as synonymous with consciousness. And it's, he says later on, real activity is sadly ignored, although the word knowing is used indiscriminately. And it's true that we naturally think of what we call the outside world as being real, and consciousness being something very insubstantial, something you can't really get hold of. It you wonder whether it really exists or not, and that's what he's referring to there. But he says the Vedantin proves and shows you that the two false activities, so activities with dependent reality, owe their very existence to the third one. And that's where the dependent reality comes in. I think that's a bit of a Buddhist term there. But yes, the truth lover sees that all mental activity, perceiving and thinking, is just the activity of consciousness. That's its reality. It doesn't mean that on enlightenment you no longer see the world and no longer think. That's not what he means.
Right. That's the tricky part, or the sort of the hidden part is
Yes.
that these are just distinctions that allowing us to see reality as primary.
Yes.
They're just, it doesn't mean false, doesn't mean it's not there, and illusion doesn't mean it's not there. It's still an experience. It's just that it's giving us a distinction of what is always there.
Yes, its reality is dependent on what is always there, which is consciousness.
Right. Yeah. 373, how to reconcile the statements, I am the world and the world is not.
Yeah, so he starts with a quote from the Ashtavakra Gita, and that's this is I'm going to read how it's translated in my version, because I do think it's a little bit clearer. The version I have is from Thomas Byram. So that verse says, "Indeed, I am neither bound nor free, an end to illusion. It is all groundless, for the whole of creation, though it rests in me, is without foundation." So he says there's no wave at all in water. And he's saying that Ashtavakra is giving sort of two levels of teaching. But I think in my translation, it suggests really those two levels are actually one. And I feel it's maybe more accurate. But that's... at least it's more understandable. So he's saying that the only reality is me, I, consciousness. It's not that there's no world, it's just that what we perceive as being the world has no reality. The world as it is in itself is just the activity of consciousness, myself. just as the wave is the activity of the ocean. And that's really what he's trying to get across, I think.
Jenny, Susan is asking if you can read that again.
Oh, you mean my translation, Susan? Oh, okay. Indeed, I am neither bound nor free, an end to illusion. It is all groundless, for the whole of creation, though it rests in me, is without foundation.
Good. Thank you. And Rick said, this reminds me of a well-known statement made by Nisargadatta. He stated, when I look within, I realize I am nothing but, I am nothing, but when I look outward, I realize that I am everything. In other words, the I is recognized as being both the nothing and everything. What was perhaps perceived as dualistic, or the world content of experience being separate from that which is observing, the witness, collapses into one. The world is illusory only if it is understood to actually be a real world and separate from I knowing of it. They are one with no separation. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what Jenny's been saying all along, and Atmananda has been sort of re-saying the same thing over and over in different ways. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Rick. On the last, the last paragraph, did we cover that? There is no wave at all in water. That's a pretty cool idea. There's no wave at all in the water. We made a wave and it's not even there. To give an example.
Well, in a sense, the wave is there, but it's an integral part of the water.
You're right.
It's the activity of the water.
Calling this thing a wave, but it's really the activity of the water. Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's helpful to use the wave as a metaphor for a distinction of the activity of consciousness in time is not separate from itself as the ocean.
Yes, exactly. It's a very good metaphor which he uses. The very first chapter of Atma Darshan uses that metaphor.
Yeah, it's a really good one. I've heard many teachers use it.
Yeah,
and, it's very effective and it's helpful. 374 is titled, "What is the remedy for evil tendencies?"
Yes, this is interesting what he says here. So he says it's already been proved that mere mental repentance over one's past evil deeds is no guarantee against their repetition. In fact, it only aggravates them. And he goes on, if we take to evil unknowingly, an intellectual corrective might be of some avail in dissuading us from it afterwards. And he's saying that we can't deliberately change our conditioning, but if we just make a stupid mistake by accident, then if we understand intellectually that, oh yes, that was a stupid mistake and it had consequences I didn't intend, then probably we're not going to make that mistake again. And we know that in all sorts of practical ways in our lives. We know that that's right. I mean, it's how children learn. They put their hand on something that's come straight out of the oven, and they don't do it again because they get burnt. You know, it's that's I think fairly obvious. But he goes on, most often we take to such evil activities, knowing full well the scope of their consequences, but being unable to resist the stronger cravings of the heart. And but he says later, if you've heard the truth from a sage, the problem is easy enough. Whenever you find your heart straying away to anything undesirable, just think of the Guru, who is the ultimate truth, and the heart recoils with a shudder, or think twice before daring to launch into similar mischief again. In between those two quotes, there's a whole lot of progressive path exercises which we don't need to bother with, because, as he says, once you've heard the ultimate truth, then you've got somewhere to go back to. You've got consciousness to go back to.
Yeah, but so he's using the guru is really the symbol of truth.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
In the paragraph at the top of the page on 185, starts out with, well, first he says, frequent acquaintance with this state, which is so peaceful and captivating, slowly deprives the heart of all its outward going propensities. So it sort of says that
talking about the witness state there. He's not talking about pure consciousness. He's talking about the witness state, which is just the state of the mind, which is why it's a progressive practice. Right. And that's that's true. You know, there's a lot of progressive paths which use the witness state very effectively. And that's okay, but in what he's teaching, the non-duality, then the witness and the witnessed are seen as just one. He does say before long, you know, which is really what the progressive path is about. It's about leading you ultimately to the direct path, because the direct path is the culmination of, you know, all of the paths. They all end up as a direct path. They might express it a little bit differently, but what they're actually saying right at the end, after all of the purification, is the same. And he says, before long, if you practice these things, he will come into contact with a real sage, so as a direct path sage, and will be illumined through him. And this is the only law that relates the phenomenal to the absolute. The heart is always at happiness, which is one's own nature. The heart always takes you to the source and controls even the intellect. And it's that kind of beautiful magic that sometimes expressed as when the student is ready, the guru appears. It's a standard expression. And before then, you go through lots of different progressive paths, touring the mountain, sometimes described as.
And also, when the student is ready, the understanding appears also.
Well, the guru, yes, normally that will require a teacher, a guru, because it's really what he says about language, that you can't really get it from books, and even from videos, maybe from videos, but really not from books. It's ultimately you need that connection. There's a connection with someone who has understood. It gets transmitted.
What?
The understanding gets transmitted in a
That's
way.
exactly what I was going to say. There's a transmission that comes
Yeah.
through even this venue. There's a transmission that comes through when someone is standing in that understanding. It transmits.
Yes. Yeah.
Even through video.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. He says that a thing can prove the existence of nothing other than itself. Sensations can prove the existence of the senses alone, and so on. So you can also prove only yourself in what you see.
Yes. This really relates to the next one, 375, actually. I don't know why it's put under 374, because the content actually relates more to 375. So he said,
I can read that after we do 375.
well, no, we do it before, because he's saying there is only yourself, Advaita.
Yeah.
That's basically what it says, and that's that quote. That is a nice quote from his translation of Ashtavakra Gita. In what you see, just you shines forth alone. What else but gold shines out in golden ornaments?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he takes that in 375. Then he takes that a bit further, and he says it's admitted that thoughts and feelings are in myself. It's also admitted that in me there cannot be anything other than myself. And I can't go outside of myself to know or feel anything, and things from outside cannot come into me. So I am everything. There's nothing out. There's no inside and outside of me, he's saying.
Right.
So the moment they touch me to get transformed into myself, and thus I know only myself always.
But the important distinction here is when he says myself, he's not talking about the person. He's not talking about a body mind.
He's not talking about a body mind because, well, myself isn't, the self isn't a body mind. He's talking about the universal self that we all are, which is pure consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
Eve said, as a wave seething and foaming is only water, so all creation streaming out of the self is only the self. Ashtavakra Gita by Thomas Byron.
Yeah, yeah. Really, it doesn't go out of the self. In fact, it's because there is no outside of the self. That's the ultimate realization, understanding.
Yeah, Rick was talking about that last discourse, the one before last, where he says a rather progressive or self-help type of a question. That's what I thought 100%. What is the remedy for evil tendencies? Atmananda was guy, but he sort of directed him away from the self-help tendency.
It's something beautiful that a good teacher will do. He's asked a question which doesn't relate to his teaching, and he doesn't say, oh no, this doesn't relate to my teaching. He answers the question and then goes on to take the person further, and that's something that Francis also does. He'll say, well, this isn't really what we discuss here, but, and then he will explain it, and then he will take the person further. And yeah, it's a kind of standard way of teaching in the direct path.
Yeah.
Because if you don't answer the question, then that question's still going to buzz around in the person's mind, and it's not going to help them because it's still going to be there. So you need to answer it, and then you take them further.
Right. Rick said witness perception is a big first step in the right direction, but it's incomplete. It's still rooted in duality, the known and the knower of it. And then Andrew said, confession to a priest is a remedy. It can be.
Well, actually, that's an interesting one, because yes, ultimately, there's no one who's guilty. There's no separate entity who is guilty. So if there's a feeling of guilt, then that relates to a sense of separation. So in some ways, for someone who doesn't understand or know anything about this teaching, going to a priest and confessing can help, because it takes that guilt away. It takes away part of something they've superimposed onto their identity, and which is holding them back.
Yeah, it can help, and it can also hurt, because I mean, you know, there's a verse that says, by the mouth confession is made unto salvation. And I think if the priest says nothing, it can be the most helpful, because then you're just expressing something that is really a burden. And by expressing it, if you don't touch it, it has a dissolution.
Yes. The approach we tend to take in the direct path is just to show, which is obviously not appropriate to a priest at all, is to show people that they don't choose their thoughts. So yes, you would get them to look at what that event was, but to see that generally they don't choose their thoughts. Therefore, they did not choose their thought, the thought that led to that action that they took. However, that doesn't mean to say that in the now there might not be something that can be done which will repair whatever might have been broken in that event. So there's this is very, it's a very deep part of this teaching. It's that contrast between the past, leaving the past in the past, but seeing that it's there, seeing that it's not myself, but at the same time, in the now, which is the only time there is ever any freedom, there might be freedom to correct something that happened in the past.
Yeah. I like this last thing that Rick said. He said, to say that all is God is a move in the right direction, starting to remove the idea of the personal.
Yeah.
It is, as long as one understands that my thoughts are God, that all thoughts are God, that everything is God, and then relating that to that God is not separate from what I am.
Yes. Yeah.
Once that's understood, and the separateness can dissolve into that understanding. So look at the next one. Did we cover 375? What are thoughts and feelings?
Yes, I think so. I mean, what he's referring to is obviously, as you said, the universal self rather than an individual self. And he's saying that our thoughts and feelings, in other words, are integral with the totality. So he's not implying that we choose our thoughts and feelings.
That was the myself one. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Idea and language, 376. For everyone, an idea takes its origin in the mind, and it has a generic language of its own. It is this idea, in its own generic language, that everybody tries to express in the spoken or written language.
Yes, and he's explaining the difficulty of translating these discourses accurately. And he says later, but the English language sometimes puts more emphasis on language and the form of expression, and the application of this artificial restriction, a fraction of the idea is naturally lost. So he's really saying in English we place more meaning on each individual word and phrase, whereas in his language, Malayalam, it's more metaphorical.
Yeah. And then he talks in 377, he sort of de-objectifies language.
Yes. So that is this, and this and this is that. That's sayings of Atmananda himself, but they relate to the very well-known Mahavakya Tattvamasi, thou art that. And another way of expressing it is what I am, or being and consciousness are one. As he says, when you say that is this, the this as such is forgotten and is merged into that, or in other words, that explains this. But when you say this is that, the that is forgotten as such and is merged into this, or in other words, this explains that. And then he goes on to explain that represents Brahman, the absolute reality, and this represents the world of name and form. And so he's using this to refer to the world, that to refer to the absolute reality, Brahman. And he's saying that although the world as we perceive it is unreal, the reality of the world is the ultimate reality, which is myself, consciousness. So being and consciousness are one. He's saying the same thing. It's almost like a direct path. Mahavakya, being and consciousness are one.
Yeah, all objects are one. And that's awesome, really. When you come to the place of that clarity, everything takes on a new experience.
Yes.
This is why when you begin to realize awakeness, you don't treat other people and the animals and the world as cruel as you did when you were coming from the idea that you're a separate self.
Yes, you realize oneness. Yeah. That everything is one, as I am all that is. Yeah.
On 378, what is meant by the deluge?
Oh, this goes back to Hindu philosophy and the origin of the world and cosmic cycles and all of that that sort of thing. And so again, he's answering the person's question, but he's saying the root of this question, as well as of the search, is the acceptance of the principle of interdependence of objects as true. This position is not correct. And then he gives this lovely example of seeing a cow and a calf in your dream, and the seer, the seeing and the seen are all creations of the mind. So you see the cow and you see the calf separately, but immediately you create a new perception that the calf is the offspring of the cow. Thus, in fact, the cow, the calf, and the relationship between them are three entirely different perceptions, related only to the common perceiver, you. So what he's saying is that our division of the world into objects and relationships between objects is just a conceptualization of mind. It has no absolute reality. Apparent objects are interconnected, but only through consciousness, the universal perceiver. So everything is interconnected. The totality of the world is interconnected, but they're only interconnected through their ultimate reality, which is ourself.
Right. Yeah. I like where he, in that next paragraph, where he says, similarly, the whole objective world and all things gross as well as subtle, including even the deluge and its accredited cause, root nature, are all objects, and you are the only real subject.
Yes.
You, awareness, or I, principle, are the only real subject. Therefore, if you correctly understand the real significance of the statement that objects have only one relationship, and that with you alone, your perspective, which enabled you to visualize a deluge, disappears altogether.
Yes, and the subject and object differentiation also disappears.
Right. So understanding dissolves a separate self.
Yes, yeah. Yes, I mean, the equivalent, of course, in Christianity is the Noah's flood, and it comes into a number of things. I guess it's one of Jung's archetypes in the collective consciousness, the idea of a
coming
deluge
in
flood.
Different ways, different kinds of transmission.
Yes,
and also misinterpreted by many over the millennia.
Yeah.
Many misunderstandings have taken society 180 degrees away from what it was pointing to.
Yeah.
Let's see, Rick at the very end says the deluge only applies to name and form. It does not affect the I principle for me. That's right.
Yes, yeah.
How to handle a mantra.
So he says a mantra is a harmonious sound or group of sounds with or without a superficially intelligible meaning, but capable of creating and applying some definite and potential energy if properly uttered. So mantras are obviously used in mantra meditation. They're also used in various types of chanting, things like the Gayatri mantra, and they do seem to bring a special feeling if you hear them uttered by someone who knows how to speak them. But they are just mantras. They are just sounds. They might somehow point to some understanding within you, or they might not. So he says, therefore, accept it as such, or reject it, but don't try to correct it in accordance with the standards of rhyme or reason. So that's nothing short of sacrilege. And it's interesting he says that, because that actually happened with the mantra that I was given at the Study Society. and a School of Philosophy or School of Economic Science tried to add an A on the end of it because they thought that was more correct from the point of view of Sanskrit grammar. But then they got a telling off from the Shankaracharya in similar sorts of words as Atmananda says here.
It's the mantras can be helpful to as a location disruptor, they can be helpful to disrupt an old pattern that one has, or even in I've found mantras to be helpful in a devotional way sometimes.
Mm-hmm. What mantras have you used?
Well, I am, that I am, and then I would use some mantras from A Course in Miracles into this presence. It's called Into His Presence Would I Enter Now, but I would use the mantra from that workbook lesson, and I would it would cause me to really rest in this very peaceful abiding state, reciting mantras in a devotional way.
Yes.
Yeah. So that sort of sinks. I think it sort of disengages the mind and brings you into a state of presence. Your attention is on just this presence.
Yes, I think it can do. Obviously, for us in the West, the Indian mantras, then we don't necessarily know the superficial meaning. But in the case of the English ones, then yes, you do. And of course, as he indicates, you need to go beyond that superficial meaning to feel the energy of it, to allow it to take you somewhere.
Yeah. I found it helpful when I was walking Arunachala. I found it very meaningful and devotional in a visceral way to have a mantra that I was just reciting to myself, or even the I am mantra can be very, very deeply sinking down into self-presence as an abiding place.
Yes, for quite a number of years, although I stopped doing mantra meditation, the mantra I was given would sometimes come back to me. There came a point when I didn't need it anymore, but for quite a few years it will come back to me.
Yeah. Sylvia, you have your hand up?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I just wanted to say with the mantras, rather, whatever. Miranda McPherson just put out an album on some mantras and a little bit of an explanation for each that are very helpful to me anyway. So I would it's just a statement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like mantras myself. I don't think I think they can be overused and abused. I think they can be helpful.
Yeah. Yes, abuse of a mantra can be when you use it when you have sort of negative feelings or feelings of agitation or something, and you use a mantra to get back to what I am, and that's getting back to a state of the mind, and that's not the right way to use a mantra. A mantra should really only be used as a celebration. Really, if there's any kind of negative feeling, then the important thing is to look at what provoked that feeling, and then trace that back to the sense of being a separate entity, and then see from what you've really understood, from what you've deeply understood, that there is no separate entity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The bhajans that I've been part of at different ashrams, Muji's ashram, different temples, different celebrations, even at the Ramana Maharshi ashram in Bangalore, we did bhajans of a type, and that seemed to be devotional mantra driven.
Yes, yes. Yes.
I love it. It's just as you say, it's a celebration. It brings your attention to out of the thinking mind into a vibration of presence. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last one we're looking at is, what is the basis of idea and language?
This is beautiful what he says here. An idea comes clothed in language. When the clothing is taken away, the idea stands as the ultimate truth, so much so that language may be said to be the art of concealing ideas, and ideas in turn to be the art of concealing the truth. And we see this concealing happening whenever the mind struggles with the words of a teacher or a sage. And if it's a living teacher, then of course we go back to our teacher for clarification. But with words from ancient sages, we can't do that. So it's inevitable that their teaching gets distorted over time. So the truth gets concealed over time. And that's really how religions are born. And ultimately teachings, all of them, turn into religions eventually.
I wonder what this religion will be called. The Atmananda followers?
Well, I think there already is a direct path religion, unfortunately. You're sometimes
path, non-dual path. You call it this. You're right. It does turn into a kind of a religious.
It does, and you hear people quoting the same things in the same words over and over again, but there's no feeling behind it. It's not coming from the heart,
It says tears are the expression of a subtler, and this was an interesting statement he said here. The tears are the expression of a subtler and deeper emotion behind them, and they have no significance except in relation to this emotion. One who sees these tears independent of the emotion that caused them has seen nothing more than warm salt water. What do you think of that?
Well, it's a beautiful analogy, isn't it? And then he says, he who is capable of seeing the nature of that emotion behind the tears alone understands the real significance of the tears. He alone is competent to comment on the tears. And then he relates the analogy to sacred texts. He said, similarly, in commenting upon a Vedantic text, he alone is competent to do the job properly, who has clearly visualized the background or the reality behind the text, and has made it his own. And that applies not just to commentaries on the text, but it also applies to translations. And there are a lot of texts with many different translations, and it's not easy to find one that really gets the flavor across in English. Some of them will translate very literally the Sanskrit word into one of the possible, because every Sanskrit word has many different meanings in English, one of the possible meanings. And others of them, you feel that the translator has really felt what the author is saying within himself and is then expressing it in English. And sometimes those translations are more poetic. And there's quite a good example with Rumi. There are a lot of academics who say that Coleman Barks's translations of Rumi are absolute rubbish. And from the point of view of linguistic accuracy, I think that's true. But from the point of view of actually understanding and conveying that understanding, I think it's not true.
Right. Yeah. What he's suggesting here is that the understanding, one who is living in the understanding, sees the salt water, sees the background of experience first, and then allows whatever is coming to be compassionate or be caring or to be understanding. In the emotional sense, it comes later with the background established first.
Yes, I think it's the understanding that that happens just in an instant. Understanding is never in time, and I mean, I think we all know if we're with someone who is in tears, who is very upset, there is an immediate feeling of oneness with them, an immediate feeling of that emotion. It transmits itself clearly to us, and we see it, and we feel it.
Well, and you feel you're not unattached to the emotion because you feel the pain or you feel the grief.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. At the same time, that emotion lands on the background of understanding what we are, and that we are not separate from this person or the rest of the world. And it also falls upon that kind of fearlessness. Whatever is happening, there's a knowing that everything will be okay eventually. And it's our knowing, it's our fearlessness, it's our knowing that everything will be okay, that also communicates itself in the opposite direction to the one who is crying.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rick said, the understanding of language, idea, or tears is dependent upon recognizing the essential and fundamental, or their essence. That is, recognizing that everything is rooted in this unchanging I principle. All understanding, peace, happiness, and right action always stems from the source.
Yes.
The mind can easily seem almost parrot-like in repeating important pointers from the guru. Granted, it may resonate a bit, but ultimately it's of very little value if there's no experiential understanding of those words. The real understanding does not rest in the words themselves, rather it's in the silence before, between, and after the words. That. Eve?
Yes, and you notice, in fact, on that point, in Francis's satsangs, very often the questioner, when he's had an answer that he's happy with, he will sit in silence with Francis, and he won't immediately say thank you. He will just sit, and he will allow that silent transmission to happen.
Yeah, it can be helpful in your own life experience. If you're in the middle of anything, your own experiences, family experiences, decision making, whatever. If you precede that with quiet, or you move to quiet presence, you often find the solution to your problem.
Yes, it's the way mathematicians work.
Yeah.
Find the solution to a mathematical problem, not by scribbling loads of formulae and equations, just by going into silence.
Yeah. That's why stopping, I'm going to pause on this and come back to it in an hour.
Yeah.
A lot of times clarity can come out of that.
Yes, yeah.
Eve said, I would say that Atmananda has a way of description that carries one to the background of reality. It is not enough to hear or read these words. One must absorb the words in visualization of the experience. Yeah, I'd say that's true. It's contemplating and bringing it close, and not just a mentation of activity. But
yes, it's going beyond the words to your own direct experience, which almost certainly would be re-expressed in totally different words.
right.
Because you don't have an Indian background.
Yeah. Well, I think we've finished early today.
It looks like it. Unless anyone wants to ask anything else.
Anyone else have anything to say? Rick says silence is a very unusual non-doing. Yes, it's like magic, man. Silence is the solve of the universe. It solves everything, and it's the solve. It happens very naturally when all agenda and expectation just gets in the way. You said gets out of the way. Okay, when it gets in the way. What was the good Rumi translation author again, please?
Coleman Barks. It's the most common, most widely read translation. So, yeah.
Does anyone have, Susan or Jenny, do you, or if Ron is here, does someone have a link to the conference for anyone that isn't registered? The conference starts on Friday morning with Rupert as our first speaker. So we hope to see you at the conference this weekend. Click on the link when somebody puts it in the chat, and you can go and register for free. You can watch it live for free, or you can purchase the replays for $127, or you can, I think there's a pay it forward registration again this year if you want to pay it forward for people that we give scholarships to that they can't be there for the conference, but they don't want to miss it, and they may have money problems. So there's a couple of people that work with those folks with scholarships, and that's also available. So there's the link. Don't miss the conference. And thank you all for being with us for this book study. It's good to see all the familiar faces, and have a good time. We'll see you next week for the next discourses on Atmananda, Krishna Menon. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jenny. See you next
Thank you,
week.
Bill. Lovely to see you all.
Yes, Jenny is one of our presenters. Don't miss her session. Thank you all. Bye-bye.